I, I have to tell you though, I'm tired of cooking. I've been cooking all week for my mom. She's got a freezer full of food now.
Good for you.
How good.
Is she living on her own or in a,
Yep, yep.
wow.
She's
How old is she?
she'll be 98 in January.
Wow.
Yep,
And on her own still.
yep, yep. She did good. She does good.
She does, yeah.
She has a lot of help though
Okay.
from
Good.
family. From family. She doesn't.
Good morning. Welcome to the Universalist Church Online, in which love is the spirit. We're so glad you're here, whether you're joining us from West Hartford or anywhere in the world. And if you remembered to set your clocks back last night, then you're here right on time. And if not, thank you for your patience over the last hour waiting for service to begin. I'm Dave Lee, one of the trustees of the Universalist Church Board. If you're attending worship through the YouTube live stream, we invite you to connect with us more deeply. Visit our webpage, www.westhartforduu.org, to learn more. There you can use the contact page to get onto our mailing list and let us know how you'd like to become involved. Our electronic communications are the best way for us to stay connected. We look forward to helping you become part of the Universalist Church, no matter where you live. Online worship can be wonderful, but technology sometimes fails us. We appreciate your graciousness when that happens. Today's order of service will appear in the Zoom chat box and in the YouTube description. We'll have our fellowship time around 10:50 after worship ends. If you're attending through Zoom today, please stay online even if you need to step away for a short break to connect with one another and to get to know some new people too. We know it's not always easy to join a conversation with people you don't know well, but we need to keep making connections in times like these. This is a good way to do that. And now, please, take a moment to turn off your email and other apps, put the keyboard away, and settle in for worship.
Please join me in speaking the words of our affirmation, our covenant. It's in the description. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Last Sunday in church school, the children heard a story called Who Loves the Darkness? And it's stuck in my brain all week. In it, a child gets lost in the woods and darkness falls at dusk. The kid gets really scared, terrified really. Who wouldn't? It's dark. Eventually, a big scary shape swoops down out of the sky at him. It's an owl. Luckily, it's a friendly owl, and this owl is even gifted with speech. The owl explains to the child that the dark doesn't have to be scary for everybody. In fact, it's where some of us thrive. He guides the child through the woods. They meet a bat along the way who's eating mosquitoes. They gaze up at the night sky and wonder at the stars and their place in the universe. Eventually, they come to a shoreline and find baby turtles hatching out of their eggs in the sand and scampering on down towards the sea. Something that can only happen in the darkness. Darkness means safety to those baby turtles. Eventually, the child calms down, and the owl helps guide him home. I'm not usually a worrier in my life, although who right now isn't somewhat distressed? I've been relating to that child all week, thinking about how I feel like I'm lost in the woods, stumbling around in the darkness. Maybe that resonates with you too. But the stories helped me kind of think about the things that give me hope and the things that are good in this darkness. I'm thinking about witnessing the food ministry reinvent itself in order to distribute food and meet the challenges of the COVID crisis. This week in particular, these couple of days right now, I'm really thinking about the social justice ministry. I joined them on a call last week and learned about their phone banking efforts to combat voter suppression. Maybe someone can put in the chat, I forget what the number was. Do you know how many calls they made? I couldn't believe it was possible. It was thousands of phone calls that they're responsible for to make sure people understand their right to vote. It boggled my mind. Maybe someone can put it in the chat what the number was. I couldn't believe it. But it's possible. It's completely possible. And that's because there are those of us who know what to do in those dark moments. They recognize that they have a chance to thrive there and what they can do in that possibility. So these next couple of days, I know I'm going to continue to feel like I'm stumbling around in the darkness. You might too. But try to think about those instances along the way, those things in your life that point out that there are beautiful things and beautiful moments and special things that are happening when the sun goes down. There are those of us who thrive and know what to do. And they'll help us through these moments until we reach that time when the sun comes up again.
Praise God for lovely old nation. Praise God for beauty everywhere. Praise God for hope of victory. Praise God for truth that makes us free.
We are grateful for all the ways in which you support this congregation and one another, and the rest of the world too. In this ongoing time of challenges and opportunities, the need for communities of justice, wisdom, and love has only become more apparent. As one of the ways we serve the wider world, we share our general offering each week with organizations that are in harmony with our values, who do work in the world that brings us ever closer to creating the beloved community. This month, we share our offering with Maria C. Colon Sanchez Elementary School in Hartford, Connecticut. The pandemic has made life more difficult for so many people and has especially upended the lives of teachers and students and parents. Sanchez is a public school in Hartford that we've helped to support for years, particularly through our holiday book drive. And this is a moment when our support can help the school and its community once again, especially as the pandemic is picking up speed. And because sharing our plate has worked so well since we started this last year, we are planning to continue, which means that we need your ideas for organizations that we can help support in the community. So you'll find a survey in the weekly newsletter that came out on Friday, and we'll keep publicizing that in multiple ways for a while so that you can suggest organizations with whom we might share our resources. Please take a look at it, fill it out, and let us know who you would like us to help support through sharing our offering. Thank you.
There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere.
Because we're live streaming, our practice during the pastoral prayer is only to share first names and last initials. But please do check the chat for the full names of folks that we're mentioning who need your prayers and thoughts. So please keep Ivan L. in your thoughts and prayers. He will be having an elective spinal surgery on November 3rd. And depending on the outcome, he may be spending a couple nights at the hospital or coming home for recovery. His recovery is expected to take a few months. So I know that Ivan and the family could definitely use your thoughts and prayers, your kindness and your support. Please join me in a moment of prayer and meditation. Spirit, which is at the heart of life, Spirit we sometimes call resilience, persistence, even resurrection and rebirth. Be with us in times that break our hearts, in times that call for more than we think we have to give, times that reveal our anxieties, our fears, our hopes, our fondest dreams. When we are aching with grief or uncertainty, when we do not know how to move forward, when we are beset with troubles or overwhelmed by those things which might not ordinarily bring us low. In those times, give us courage and strength. The courage to continue on, the strength to rely on one another, to act well in the world, to nurture ourselves and a vision of the world that is filled with love and justice, truth and compassion. Let us discover moments of peace or pleasure or joy that exist even among these uncertainties. The color of autumn leaves, the beauty and the hush of falling snow, the smile we see in the crinkling of one another's eyes above all of our masks. Whether in situations created by nature or politics, by accident or intent, by circumstance or by plan, may we have enough within ourselves to rise, to come up from where we have taken shelter or where we have been pushed to the ground, to lift ourselves and one another up so that we may recreate this world better than it ever was before. Let us take a moment in stillness together. Where there is uncertainty, let us find strength. Where there is worry, let us find comfort. Let us create these things for one another and recreate the world so that it is better than it ever was before. May it be so. Amen.
Stirrings of compassion
Our 3 readings today are adapted from 365 Tao, a collection of daily meditations on single words by Taoist scholar and author Deng Ming Dao. Disaster. Disaster strikes at its own time. It is so overwhelming that we can do nothing other than accept it. It alters the course of our days, our work, our very thinking. Although it is tempting to resent disaster, there's not much use in doing so. We cannot say the disaster has malice towards us, though it might have been deadly. And it's hard to say that it's wrecked our plans. In one stroke, it changes the very basis of the day. Disaster is natural. It is not the curse of the gods. It is not punishment. Disaster results from the interplay of forces. The earthquake from pressures in the earth, the hurricane from wind and rain, even the accidental fire from a spark. We rush to ask why. In the wake of a great disaster, we should not let superstition interfere with dispassionate acceptance. There is no God visiting down destruction. Disasters may well change us deeply, but they will pass. We must keep to our deeper convictions and remember our goals. Whether we remain ash or become the phoenix is up to us. Growth. A moving door hinge never corrodes. Flowing water never grows stagnant. All the different aspects of a person, body, mind, and spirit, have one curious quality. If they cease to be exercised, they stop growing. Once they stop growing, they begin to atrophy. That is why, no matter how much you've accomplished, and no matter how old you are, you must keep exercising all parts of yourself. We only grow when we're challenged. Muscles do not strengthen without resistance. Mental faculties do not sharpen without critical thinking. The spirit does not soar without something to excite it. The way of challenging oneself is a valid but difficult path. Breakthrough. How long can stagnation last with us? If we find ourselves blocked and frustrated in life, we must look for the inevitable outlet. Nothing is permanent. So how can our obstacles last? We need to look for the first opportunity to set things moving again.
Oh, beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self our country loved, and mercy more than life. America, my America, may God thy gold refine till all success sing to shining sea. Shining sea.
It is the day after Halloween. Halloween being a day on which we celebrate all sorts of things that scare us. But I have to say that Halloween wasn't nearly as scary this year as so much of real life. There are so many things that may have made me uncertain and worried this year. Natural disasters, like hurricanes that turn into tropical storms with lengthy power outages here and across the US. Wildfires on the West Coast for months and months, and this big earthquake in Turkey and Greece just a couple of days ago. There are human disasters like police brutality and racism, the 545 children separated from their parents by our government at the border who still are not reunited with their families. And this disaster that is a bit of both, the pandemic, which is getting worse once again, in part probably because of the weather and in part because we have a federal administration that refuses to understand that preserving the lives of its people is its most important job. The first natural disaster that I remember was the eruption of Mount St. Helens in Washington state. And of course, since then, there have been plenty. The first human disaster that I remember was the explosion of the Challenger space shuttle. And since then, we have had plenty of human disasters too. It is hard for me to hold all of them in my mind and in my heart. And now that I've named my firsts, I suspect that you have been thinking about your first disasters that you remember too. In those moments, I have a few places that I turn for wisdom and hope when I am feeling at a loss. I go to mythology and scripture. I go to the medieval and contemporary Western mystics. I go to poetry. I go to ecology. I hope that you are thinking about your sources of wisdom too. Another one for me is Taoism. And Deng Ming Dao, an American author and scholar of Taoism, writes, "Disaster is natural. It's not the curse of the gods. It's not punishment. Disaster results from the interplay of forces. The earthquake from pressures in the earth, the hurricane from wind and rain, even accidental fire from a spark or lightning. We rush to ask why in the wake of a great disaster, but we should not let superstition interfere with our acceptance. There is no vengeful God visiting down destruction. If we must ask why after a terrible storm, there is no simple answer. It's not about sin or moral failings. It has to do with weather systems and coincidences of full moon and high tide and our human inability to plan for consequences, some of which we can imagine and some of which we cannot. Instead, rather than asking why, we should be asking how, and then consider how changing climate affects weather patterns and sea levels and water temperatures, and ask if we have played a role. But this is not existential punishment, so much as a combination of circumstance and lack of foresight. With just a small change or two in the contributing factors, any hurricane could spin back out into the ocean and fade away. Taoism reminds us that these kinds of events are part of the natural functioning of the universe. They're not the interferences of an angry God. The word disaster, however, does not just apply to natural events in the English language. We also use this word to speak of things that are part of our humanly created life, where we have failed to address the world well, like climate change or pandemic, or where we humans have created the problem for ourselves completely. I remember the very first presidential election in which I was so personally invested in the outcome, as was everyone else that I knew. And not all of us were on the same page. We all had our preferred candidate. Not all of us wanted the same outcome. And in our conversations, it was clear that regardless of who won, there would be many who would be feeling crushed afterward. And after that election, I was one of the people who was crushed. I felt as though someone had physically punched me in the stomach. The results felt like an assault on me personally, and I was distraught. I was laid low. I was incapable of seeing a way forward. At that time, I saw that election as a disaster. And I think in many ways it had enormously damaging repercussions for our country and the world. But that single election was not the only contributing factor to where we are today. Where we are today is the culmination of years of policies and choices and elections and cultural shifts, some for good and some for ill, with each election contributing its own momentum. But at that time, I wasn't focused on that. And in each election thereafter, maybe I learned a little bit more about how it all rolled together, but instead, in the elections where my candidate has lost, I end up with the sense that the world is crumbling around me and that what I had hoped and worked for was lost for 4 years. I'm seeing a similar dynamic as we approach Election Day just a couple of days from now. That the amount of money and energy and emotion and hope and fear tied into the election of this president for the next 4 years, well, afterward, many people will be laid low, regardless of who is elected. And it's going to result in people looking at one another, wondering how in the world everything went so horribly wrong. Who are these people that could have done such a thing as this? I too am deeply invested once again. And I think that what I see as the wrong result will be a disaster. But disaster of this kind isn't the whim of a god or a supernatural punishment either. It is what happens when greed and fear and a desire for power at all costs gets mixed up with hope and promise and idealism. We UUs hold the democratic process as part of our covenant among our congregations. It is our fifth principle. We covenant to affirm and promote the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. But now, it looks to me like the democratic process has become caught up in its own storm, its own illness, with money and desperation for power overrunning us all, trying to limit our voices and our votes. Every election now feels to me like the world hangs in the balance. Is it disaster or survival? And this year's election, it's happening in the middle of a disaster we call pandemic. Disaster, a thing that happens that brings devastation, can occur anywhere, anytime, with little or plenty of forewarning. It can be a personal rejection or a failure. It can be a diagnosis, or an election, or a storm, a fire, or an argument. But what I worry about most, though, are not these disasters. They are going to occur whether we know about them or plan for them or not. What I'm really concerned about is that anything that any of us might see as a disaster, natural or human-made, theoretical, potential, real, will result in the thing that I fear the most: stagnation, whether it comes from despair or complacency. Deng Ming Dao writes, "A moving door hinge never corrodes. Flowing water never grows stagnant. We only grow when we are challenged. Muscles do not strengthen without resistance. Mental faculties do not sharpen without critical thinking. The spirit does not soar without something to excite it." Disaster of whatever form is terrible. But what can happen after, without our ability to be courageous and help one another move forward, is worse. Anxiety, fear, depression, despair, these things prevent us from overcoming hardship. Complacency, even comfort when things go our way, these things can prevent us from excellence, from transformation, from fulfilling our potential, from working to make the world better. Change doesn't just come from electing people. It's important. Get out there and vote. Do not stay home. But that's not the only piece. Change comes from continuing the work that we have done, from making our voices heard and our votes count, and then reminding elected officials and everyone else that we have not forgotten about the issues that matter most. Regardless of who becomes president as a result of this coming election, people who want to see change in the world are going to have to keep working for it. Regardless of who becomes president, some people will see one another as evil or deluded. But most people here aren't actually mortal enemies of others. There are actually those who do seek to oppress and harm. We know this. But many of us, most of us, are people who have felt our own disasters. Many of us have been persuaded by people, some of whom are hungry for power and control. We are people who need our fears acknowledged and our hard circumstances seen, no matter where we are, where we live, or what our political persuasions are. We need love. We need truth, and we need transformation. If we want the world to reflect our values of love, inclusivity, justice, democracy, then we must be willing to be out in the world and make it so. Our covenant, our principles and purposes that we share with other congregations remind us that we all, every person, has worth and dignity. And that doesn't go away when we disagree, even when we disagree profoundly. I am grateful to have that covenant guide my life because it calls me to be a better person than I might otherwise prefer. Even in moments when I try to simplify the world, my faith calls me to overcome my disappointment, or my rage, or my despair. And then it reminds me to come back and do the work of change, no matter who is elected, no matter how we thrive, no matter what disasters might occur. I cannot tell you where you will find your courage. But I find mine in part in the example of ecology, in which life, health, goodness finds a way to grow despite what acts against it. I find my courage in the relationships I have with other people and the experience of something powerful beyond myself that feels like comfort and inspiration and love. I find mine in the stories and songs and poems of people who have faced hardship and chosen to continue on, and I find it in coalitions of people who will not accept a status quo that is harmful, oppressive, damaging, and instead is a community of people who are determined to make this world better than it ever was before. I've talked a lot about disasters. We've had a lot of disasters this year. I don't necessarily think every election is a disaster or will be, to be clear. But I do think that we have to recognize that for some people, no matter what the end result is, it is going to be shattering. And we will need one another. We will need our values and our hopes. We will need our reverences and our courage to get through this coming week and to move forward into the coming weeks and months and years in order to make this world the world we believe it should be. No matter what happens on Tuesday or in the time after, our best option is to rally together, to work to rebuild our health, our stability, our civics, our interconnections as a nation, to move forward and surpass what we have been before. Our capacity to overcome hardship, great hardship, is found within and among us, inspired by what is sacred and meaningful. I don't believe that miracles save people in disasters because a wizard god is somehow casting magic to make it better. Instead, I believe that we are the miracle makers. We are the ones who change everything for the better. We are the eyes and the ears, the hands and the mouths of God. Deng Ming Dao writes, "Disasters may well change us deeply, but they will pass. We must keep to our deeper convictions and remember our goals. Whether we remain ash or become the phoenix is up to us." And so, on this day, as we look forward, not yet knowing what will happen in this election or with the pandemic or anything else that may be coming down the pike, let us remember that it is up to us whether we remain ash or become the phoenix. May we find a way to make this world the world it should have always been, together. May it be so. Amen. Please, let's join together in speaking our unison benediction. The words will be in the chat or the description. Engage with the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all beings.